Hey, welcome back, and nice to see everyone. Welcome back to the nonprofit leadership table here. And once again, we have a great guest for us as we look at fundraising and leadership. And we have Kelli King-Jackson, and Kelli is with the Simmons Foundation. And I'm just really excited to have you and to really be able to grill you, Kelli, on some really great questions around fundraising. You doing okay?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, and you have had a varied career, right? I mean, because before you were at the Children's Defense Fund, and you've just done some extraordinary things, which we'll get into. But I wanted to ask you, since we're talking about fundraising tonight, if you had to write a book about fundraising, chapters, what would they be about? What are some of the key themes that you would want to talk about in regards to fundraising?
I definitely would want to talk about telling the story. I would want to talk about being straight and to the point. I'd probably call that chapter Get to It. Would want to talk about connection and collaboration. And I think another big one I'd want to talk about is Show Me the Money.
What would Show Me the Money be about?
Show Me the Money would be allowing us to see what is your money plan, not just about grants, but beyond grants, and how your money would flow and how it would touch programs.
So explain to me how, if I'm a brand new fundraising person and here is the Simmons Foundation, or any other foundation for that matter, do I just say, hey, can I have some money because I'm doing a really good thing here?
Usually not. All foundations are different, but I definitely tell folks if it's a pretty significant size foundation, giving grants above like a $5,000, the first thing you would want to do is check out a website. Even very small foundations tend to have something on their website, and I can usually tell if someone's been on our website or not. And we try to put all of our information, us as a foundation, out there because we want to be transparent about our process, what we're looking for. So that's the first thing I would tell someone to do.
A little bit of research on Simmons or the foundation you're going to ask money from.
Absolutely. Research about the foundation and also reviewing annual reports so you can research what type of organizations that foundation already gives money to.
And if they're organizations like yours, then there's an excellent chance that they might give to you.
Yes.
And then from there, I mean, what are the things that you're looking for? I mean, I know that you get excited about some organizations as they ask you for funding. What are the things that that you like to see?
I like to see trying new things. I like to see groups who don't say they're the only ones who are doing something, but who say maybe how they're doing a different spin on something or how a partnership allows them to expand on work that's already happening. Definitely like folks who are looking at problem solving, not just from a service delivery standpoint, but from a systems perspective. So some advocacy work is really exciting to us as a foundation because services are really important, but we know that systems often lead folks to needing services, and so we like to see both in our portfolio.
And you guys are maybe a little bit more progressive in terms of trying new things than maybe some other foundations.
Yes.
And why is that?
A lot of it has to do with our donor. Every foundation was started by someone or some entity, and our donor is really excited about advocacy and really excited about women's issues and women's health, really excited about equality and LGBTQ issues. And so we get to talk about that very openly, and our portfolio of grants reflects those, those values.
Now, did you grow up thinking I want to be a foundation grant officer?
No, I didn't become a grant officer thinking I wanted to be a grant officer.
So how did this all happen?
Great opportunity at the right time. I had been doing program work and really loved program work. I didn't really think I wanted this job, and I went on the interview a little reluctant in thinking, oh, this will be a good exercise in learning something new. And left the interview like, oh my God, I really want this job. To be a foundation that can be connected to community is a dream opportunity. So
what is the most exciting thing for you about being at Simmons?
Again, staying connected to the community. I didn't want to sit in the office and read proposals. I really wanted to know what's happening on the ground and where are unique opportunities for us to make a difference. We can do things that some other foundations can't do, and so I can only know where that need is if I'm out at committees, at coalition meetings, talking to folks. So that balance in our foundation makes my job the best.
When you're looking at nonprofits to fund, what are some of the things that you see and you think, oh, this is a good nonprofit? What are some of the characteristics of good nonprofits?
Definitely leadership and governance. Having a strong leadership team, having a diverse leadership team, diverse in gender, ethnicity, race, experience. Everyone at your organization should not look like you, is my belief.
Sure.
You need other people from other experiences to be asking you different questions. That's something that I definitely ask questions about and want to know about. If you can have people with lived experience who have some leadership role, that is also very exciting for us. Really wanting an organization that listens to the community and is not dictating to the community what they think the community needs as well.
And then you see sometimes nonprofits that are asking you for funds and you think, what's going on here? What are some of the big sort of warning signs for you?
A paternalistic tone. People, when you're
out, do you see that a lot?
We do see that more than I would want to see it. People who say things like, oh, the children really did like the books. They really do want to read. It's just very condescending. And so, when I hear people talk like that, I'm thinking, well, if you talk to your client like that and you don't see them as a partner, how does that work in terms of true change in a community? And, are we really empowering folks? And are we really making lasting change? Are we putting kind of Band-Aids on problems and, saying, oh, the poor little people? Or are we saying, how can we work together? We've identified what this problem is and we want to chart a path forward. And we want to see less of that in the community.
Yeah. Do you see organizations, when you think of the sort of the high performing organizations in town, who are some of those organizations that you think, wow, they're doing the right things?
I can't say that, but I can say for us, high performing is organizations that are engaged in advocacy. Organizations who have strong collaborations. Organizations, again, where they see and you demonstrate in their work that the community is a part of their work. So they have community councils, they have communities members that sit on their board, not because they have to, but because they see value in that. Their fundraisers highlight stories, but they're not taking advantage of folks who have experienced hardship. Those are the organizations that really kind of stand out and say, hey, they really get the importance of what they're doing. That's not about them, it's about the work.
And then underperforming organizations, do you see those a lot?
We do see some underperforming. I think a lot of the underperforming organizations are the ones that struggle around governance and leadership. And to their credit, being on a small organization's board is a lot of work. And as leaders in the community, a lot of folks don't want to invest that time. They're looking for different type board opportunities. So it makes it hard for some of the small organizations to find qualified people who really want to be hands-on and in the trenches. And so I think, our community as a whole could do a better job of linking qualified people with organizations in meaningful ways so that those smaller organizations can really build and grow. And the ones who shouldn't can kind of...
That's a good point, right? You and I both run into a lot of people that'd be great board members. And I almost wish we could sort of say where they should go. That's sort of an interesting thing, right? Yeah. And then we have so many organizations that seem to have all the great board members.
They do.
Yeah.
And red flag for me is the board members that get recycled.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They've been on all the big organizations. And there are a lot of great leaders here in Houston. We have to do a better job in that.
I think we have a couple of recycled board members on ours that have been on a lot of boards, But they bring a little...
might have been a recycled board member.
Let's go back to your background a little bit, Kelli. You grew up in Oakland.
Yes.
How were those years formative for you in terms of what you're doing now?
Oakland, California, really family-oriented and really rough. Public education was always bad as long as my memory can go back. And my mom was adamant we were never going to public school.
Oh, wow.
She could not afford private school, but she found a way to get scholarships, find programs. And so we always went to Catholic school in my elementary years and always had to do enrichment programs because my mom was very adamant that education was the only way that we were going to have a different opportunity.
Did she have a college degree, your mom?
She did not. She did not.
How
go to
did she
college.
get this?
She's just a badass. Like,
Yeah.
she's just an amazing woman. And
Everyone needs a mom that's a badass,
they
right?
do. I mean, she soaked up information. She was always learning and asking people questions. She would talk to people everywhere. Oh, I want my daughter to go to that program. I was in a MESA program at UC Berkeley. I'm horrible at math, but she wanted me to have that experience. And all of that gave me a different worldview and exposed me to different people and different cultures and different ways of looking at the world. And so I owe her a big debt for that.
And then you ended up going to a prep school.
I did.
Talk about how that happened.
Yeah, my mom, again, the education woman, had us at a seminar and they started talking about boarding school. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take a look, and we left the workshop and I was like, I want to go.
Wow.
So I left Oakland, California at 16 and went to Northfield, Massachusetts and did 3 years of high school at a very elite prep school there in the woods.
Did you do it through like a better chance or?
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll say yes.
Okay. A similar type of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how did that experience sort of change you? Going from Oakland to this prep school in Massachusetts.
Life changing. I mean,
Yeah.
It was the first time I heard Bob Marley. It was the first time I saw snow. It was the first.
Was it both good and bad for you, or was it all good?
Well, when you get teenagers living in a fake enclosed environment, it's always lots of drama. But boarding school was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
It was amazing. Truly life changing.
Wow. And then you went on to undergrad.
At NYU.
Wow.
Yep.
Another important experience for you.
Yep.
And you ended up working in nonprofits,
Yes.
right? So talk about that experience for you.
Always wanting to make change and do good and didn't really know what that would look like, and started actually as a consultant with a friend working on charter petitions in South LA, trying to build quality schools in areas that didn't have a lot of options at the time. It was early on in the charter movement. And the process of writing the charter petition and figuring out the partnerships and who to bring in, I started learning more and more about nonprofits. And so my first kind of out of grad school job was working at Children's Defense Fund, and realized that my first job in college, I had participated in some of Children's Defense Fund's advocacy, but I didn't really understand what it was and what I was doing. And so it really came full circle, and I really got excited about the world of advocacy.
Wow. And then you were a children's advocate, huh?
Yeah,
Wow.
lifer.
Yeah, there you go. Tell me a little bit about the transition from working in the nonprofit world to now sort of being on this foundation side. What was that transition like for you?
Well, as someone who used to have to write grants, it was great. So, I mean, it's very different. So having sat on the side of the table where I'm having to talk about my program in words and translate what we did and why it was important to community, to now sitting on the side of the table where I'm actually reviewing proposals, I get to use kind of both sides of my experience, and I think that's an asset to our foundation, having run programs and built programs from the ground up. And it also can be hard for the nonprofits because, if a nonprofit says, oh, we're the only one, or we never have any challenges, we're doing everything A-OK, I know that having built and worked on programs, it's never A-OK, right? Mm-hmm. Your program, you start a new program and you have your first event and nobody comes. I mean, it's just what happens.
That happens?
All the time. And so I'm able to kind of bring some realism to the table sometimes to say, I know it's hard and you're trying to, you feel like it's a competition and you're trying to put your best foot forward, but we as a foundation want to know the whole story. We want to know what's working. We want to know what's not working. Because sometimes what we're interested in funding is what's not working, because we can put some innovation and some support in some of those areas. So I'm able to kind of see both of those sides, and having had that experience prior.
When you are with your fellow grant officers and other people at the foundation, and you guys are sitting back on a Friday afternoon and maybe you're laughing a little bit and you think about dumb things that people do in regards to applying for money. I mean, you probably never laugh at anyone.
Never.
But I'm wondering, what are some of the things that happen? Like, what are some of the stupid things that really happen?
So,
Because I'm sure I've made some of those mistakes.
you know, to me, the easy ones are you come to the Simmons Foundation for a $400,000 grant. And if you've looked at our annual report, you will know we don't give out $400,000 grants, right? And so, you know, some of those things that really let us know they have no idea who we are, or maybe you're an organization that you send in a grant report. I just told the story. We got a grant report, and they sent the report to the wrong foundation, right? So we're the Simmons Foundation in Houston, and they sent a grant report to our office, but it should have gone to the Simmons Foundation in Dallas, right? And so someone was, you know, rushing, multitasking, and did a grant report they didn't need to do. And so we see some of that. We see some of the classic kind of cut and paste errors, right? You use your boilerplate proposal, and your proposal's addressed to a different foundation, or all throughout the foundation, you're calling us X Foundation instead of Simmons. And honestly, those are things that just a little bit more time or another set of eyes, you can catch some of those mistakes.
And do you have the opportunity to ever go out and you see nonprofits in action and you think we should be funding them, and you talk to them about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you get back?
Say again?
What do you get? I mean, do people always follow through?
No, believe it or not, either they don't follow through, or sometimes they miss the deadline, even though we've said, hey, you know, we really like your work, would love to see you at our info session. And it's fascinating when you get, if I had been a program person and someone had reached out to me, I mean, that would be like the first application I would do. But for whatever reason, you know, it just doesn't fall to the top of people's lists. So we do, unfortunately, see that happen. We had a few this year who missed it.
Yeah. Wow, that's too bad.
It is.
Yeah. And tell me, what is the difference from Simmons to some of the other, like we have other big foundations in Houston, Houston Endowment, Episcopal Charities now, the Brown Foundation. Do they all operate pretty similarly, or are they all very different?
No, when you see one foundation, you've seen one foundation. It is kind of the party line. Every foundation is different in their structure. They're different in their values. Even though our focus areas may use the same terminology, how each foundation defines that can be different. So you really have to build the relationship with each foundation, which is time intensive. And we try to be very sensitive about that, and which is why we try to be very transparent on our website, getting all the information we think you need to know, because it is so labor intensive to learn each foundation and what they care about. But, you know, we're also colleagues and peers. And so, you know, we try as foundation folks to get together to keep up with what each other is doing, so we can kind of anticipate how that will impact our grantees.
And are there foundations that do such a good job of vetting organizations that when you get a grant from ABC and you see that the Houston Endowment has given them money, do you feel better sometimes because they've already been vetted by other foundations? It
depends on what it is.
Yeah.
Some of our values, again, are so explicit that not necessarily. Our values around LGBTQ work, it's on our website. We talk about it in our info session. And so there can be an organization that, you know, another foundation will fund that's doing good work, but what we would like to see them do around that space, if we were to fund them, is not the same.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't always match up like that.
And you guys are, say, much more progressive than, say, Houston Endowment, who doesn't necessarily like to fund advocacy, when you guys love that.
Oh, advocacy, you said the bad word. You know, as a foundation community, I'll be very transparent in Houston. We still have a ways to go in terms of funding advocacy. And so I think each foundation is defining advocacy very differently. And we try to see advocacy with the big A and the little a, and we're comfortable in that space.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and we've run into problems, you know, as an organization that goes to Austin and says, these are bills that evidence show is going to help. We've had foundations say, well, as long as you say you're going to advocate for a bill, we will never fund you. Even though the IRS is very clear on what we can do and what we can't do.
Yeah.
They have their own sort of set of rules. So it's sort of an interesting thing.
It is.
Let me ask you, in terms of the finances of a nonprofit, from the foundation viewpoint, there are a lot of groups in Houston where 60% of their funding comes from foundations. There are others where 80% comes from individual giving. Do you have any preferences, or what do you see when you see the finances of a particular organization?
Good question. So for our foundation, we will not give a grant that's more than 10% of your annual operating budget. So that's our internal policy. But when we look at an applicant's financials, we don't want to see over-reliance on grants. It's just always a bad thing. I've never seen that turn out well. And, you know, individual giving and getting private donors are hard. I remember that. Like, it's a lot of work. But at the same time, grants and foundations change, right? Our priorities change, our leaderships change. And then if 80% of your income is grants, and then your biggest donor has a leadership change, and then they're no longer funding in that space, your organization is at risk because that's a lot of money to try to fill in a short period of time. And so we really try to encourage folks to really work on some of those other spaces to make sure that they're beefing up other opportunities. And we're seeing it on the flip side. Those who have too much corporate funding right now are really struggling because they had turned away from so much grant. So it really is each organization finding their secret sauce and how to keep that as balanced as possible.
What is too much reliance on foundations, do you think? And I know it probably depends upon the organization.
It does, but I would definitely say if it's more than 70%, it's going to be rough.
Yeah.
It really will, because one significant change, you know, I've had an organization call us last quarter that got a declination, and, you know, she said, well, we were really counting on that grant. And we try to be very transparent with folks that even if you've been a grantee of ours for many, many years, a grant is never guaranteed. And so it was a very difficult conversation to have, but they had not been prepared because basically they had spent that money in their minds.
Oh my.
Right, so they may not have spent the cash, but to them, this is guaranteed money, and we know in the fourth quarter we're going to get this grant from Simmons, and when that grant didn't come, there was nothing to fill that void for that organization. And so we like folks to be thinking ahead that, you know, everything is not guaranteed, and how can we make sure we have some reserves.
How does sort of the sob story, if you will, for lack of a better term, how does that impact you guys?
For us, it's always a red flag.
Yeah.
Even if you're, you know, we're on a site visit, oh yeah, you know, we know your check usually comes in such and such month. That's always a red flag for us. We don't want to be that foundation, and you know, that's a heavy lift for a foundation to feel like an organization could close their doors or have to lay off folks because they're solely counting on your support. So yeah,
we had a board member who was the CEO of a large corporation in town, and he would talk specifically about this idea that as a foundation or as the corporate giver, they feel like they have this responsibility, and they have to let people know constantly, don't expect this every year, because they hate the sob stories as well, and it's
hard.
But it's also part of leadership. Leadership needs to understand this diversity of getting your monies from many sources is a part of keeping your organization alive.
Yeah, and I think from a fund development perspective, the best way to build your shop is to not focus on only one area, right? So when you think about development, people usually say, oh, we need a grant writer, or oh, we need an individual giving specialist. But no, you need to really look at how can you build that out so that you have representation across many different streams of income.
When you meet someone from a nonprofit, what are your expectations? I mean, do you want to develop a relationship with them? Do you want it to be a business relationship? What is it what expectations do you have? So if you're meeting me for the first time and I'm coming from Children at Risk, What is it that you want to see?
Be nice.
Yeah.
Don't tell me we declined you last year. No, I think yes to the relationship, but also realizing that it's really challenging. Last year, we funded around 100 organizations. And so it's impossible for me to have a relationship with 100 nonprofit leaders.
Yeah.
And so being mindful of the time of the foundation. And so for us, we have a wonderful gatekeeper named Kay Davis. And she is really the person that most people need to talk to, but they usually want to talk to myself or Amanda. And we're the hardest to reach. And so we've been really trying to be very intentional to get folks to understand Kay can answer your questions better than we can. She can answer faster than we can. So save those questions for Kay and let's use our time in a different way. And it's not because I don't want to spend that time. It's just I don't have the time to spend. And trying to get folks to understand that and that it's not personal.
Will you visit with pretty much anyone who asks to visit with you?
No.
No.
I used to early on because I was still so connected to the program life,
Yeah.
and I remember what that felt like.
Yeah.
I don't have the time.
You just don't have time to do it.
I don't.
And do you think you're sort of an example of what most grant officers?
I think it is increasingly harder. I think if our grant portfolio was half the size, I would love to have more meetings. But I think the other reason I don't feel as pressed anymore is I see my grantees at coalition meetings and collaborative meetings and all these other places. And so I'm constantly hearing about the work. And so they'll sometimes email me, oh, I want to go to coffee. I just saw you last week. We are not going to coffee, and that it's okay for me to say that. And honestly, some of the meetings that I take now that I wouldn't normally take are folks who are doing something new and different, and I want to learn more because I don't know a lot about their work, and I haven't had an opportunity to interact with them.
Before we go to the Twitterverse, do you ever get tired, Kelly, of when you go to a conference and people find out you're from a foundation? And whenever I have friends who work at foundations, they always get like mobbed by every little nonprofit that wants to get money. Do you get tired of that?
Honestly, I don't feel as mobbed. I think
Really?
Because we have an information session before each quarter opens.
Yeah, and anyone can go to that.
And anyone can go to that. And again, we're at all these meetings. So we are not as hidden as some other grant officers who don't have the opportunity to be as engaged in the community. So it's okay.
It's okay.
It's not too bad.
And they don't really mob you?
I mean, they ask me questions. They want to say hi.
Yeah.
But they're not bad.
That's good.
I promise.
And they all want to be your friend?
They do all want to be my friend. But they can't all be my friend.
All right, let's go to the Twitterverse. This is so nice of you to be able to answer all these questions. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone on Twitter.
So, here's a good one. So, Valerie Garate wants to know, do you follow up with organizations to see how they used the funds and if they used them in the way that they said they would?
Oh, yes. We have what's called a grant report. So our grants aren't large enough that we do an evaluation, so we try not to use that language. But we do want to know how the grant funds were used, what lessons were learned, any challenges, and kind of what are the next steps for the program.
So you're checking. And what happens when you see people didn't use it exactly? What do you do?
It usually is you have to have what I call a come to Jesus meeting. And we've had
Those
to
are
have
hard.
Those are hard. They're very awkward. I tell folks in our info session that if something is not working, don't let me hear about it at somebody else's meeting. Call the office, set up a time to chat, say, we planned on doing these outreach events, we've had to, it's not working, can we talk through it? And, one organization did a really good job of reaching out, and we were able to give them permission to switch and use the money for a PR campaign instead of what they originally intended.
Oh, wow.
Because what they realized is no one was going to come because they didn't really have the funds to do the media piece. Well, we can do that. Like, we have the flexibility to do that. But if we hadn't known and they had continued spending money on what wasn't working, Well,
Wow.
that's a waste.
Yeah.
And so, the grant report is there, but we want to hear things before the report if it needs to
And
be.
what's the percentage of organizations that get general operating money as opposed to those that get program money or specific program money from you guys?
At our foundation, it trends upward of 60-ish to 70%. So most of our grants go toward operating.
Yeah. And you guys are unique in that way.
We like it that way.
Yeah. We like it that way too, so I love that. Heidi Kelly wants to know, if a proposal does not fit your criteria, do you assist them with other funding opportunities? I mean, do you do some referrals or?
No, ma'am. Except if they're declined and it was something that was really intriguing and we know that someone else that we work with is working on that, we may try to make an introduction or a referral. But generally speaking, no, a declination doesn't have any follow-up in that way.
How active is the board of Simmons Foundation in deciding who gets money?
So we must present all grants over a certain dollar amount to our board. We have what's called a consent agenda, and a lot of foundations have that. They're under a certain amount. It's fine, but if it's over a certain amount, it has to be presented to the board, and then the board votes. So they ask questions. They ask a lot of questions about governance. They ask a lot of questions about how active your board is in giving. So they really want to know things like that.
They like seeing that 100% of the board is giving?
They do. They definitely have been asked a lot of those types of questions. They want to make sure we're not giving too much of their annual budget, and so keeping an eye out on that 10% is something they also often ask.
And how do people get on the Simmons Foundation board? Is it just family members? Or?
It is not. So our board is mostly business folks.
So they're friends of the founder or?
Colleagues of the founder.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So Emily wants to know, how can they highlight their advocacy efforts for you? How do they explain that in their grant?
In their grant narrative. Program work, we think, is vitally important, again, and we love it. But in advocacy, we want to know how is that connecting to the need in the community, right? And so what does that advocacy look like? Is it taking constituents with y'all to Austin? Is it doing community trainings around issues, trying to increase voter engagement? We want to really hear the story of what's actually happening and taking place. We don't want to know bill numbers and all of that, but we're really interested in the advocacy strategy and what you're hoping that strategy to produce. And so we're not expecting folks to say that 20 million people will leave poverty, but we would like to see things that are more tangible, like increased voter engagement, things like more resources coming into a community to help with poverty or to help with education. But we know that advocacy wins look very different, right? So it's not 10 people signed up for CHIP or Medicaid. It's something that's a little more up in the sky, and so we're open and we understand that outcomes look different in advocacy.
It used to be that Simmons they funded Acorn. No one else was funding Acorn and Simmons. Are you still like that? I mean, would you say you're still doing that? Sort of I don't want to say fringe, but sort of the organizations that not many other people would fund, right?
We still fund grassroots community organizing groups, and we try to seek them out as well. I'll say the same thing in our LGBTQ portfolio. We look and seek out for groups that are not just serving gay and bisexual, but that are serving Black transgender, right?
Yeah.
So how do we make sure it's not just the center of any population, but it's everyone in the population that's being served? So
That is exciting to be a part of a foundation that's sort of on the edge like that, right?
Yes,
I can see how that would be. Carla Jones wants to know, what's a good balance of funding? When you see an organization, what do you think is a good balance of funding?
That is hard to say.
Yeah.
I've seen some that are really kind of split even, and they've really done a good job. There's a organization out in Brazoria County, so they have a good grant. They do a charity walk, which is kind of their fundraiser, and then they also have a resale shop. And the resale shop brings in about 25% of their budget, right? And so they've been able to use this kind of unique model and bring in unrestricted revenue, right? It doesn't require a grant report. It doesn't require a grant proposal, but that brings in a steady stream of income that helps us, support their budget. And so for them, it's a third, 1/3 each. That's great for them. Another organization, maybe it's split across a fourth because they do more corporate. And I think it really depends on your community and your relationships, but it definitely should not be only foundation.
Yeah.
Only corporate.
The more individual giving, though, the
Yeah.
better it is, right?
Yeah.
These people that, yeah.
It is.
But it's hard. It's hard to build up that. I mean, even us, we've been around for a while, but we still slowly build it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a tough little thing.
Agree.
Sharonda Thomas wants to know, why don't many organizations fund advocacy?
So this is Kelli speaking. Kelli, who is a foundation staff person. I think it's a fear thing.
Yeah.
Right? People don't want to get into anything they think is muddy. And even though the IRS allows foundations to support advocacy, they just aren't comfortable. It could also be board, right? And so you don't know the background of people on foundation boards. You don't know the interest of the donor. If the donor is living or deceased, they had an intent, and the donor's intent is usually sought to be honored by the foundation. I mean, there are many different variables. I think
we're also in Texas. It's a little bit more conservative, right?
It is more conservative, and I think that the question to ask is, who are the organizations that do fund advocacy? So the strategy that I tell people is, if you do advocacy and you know it's hard to get advocacy dollars, why are you coming to me for program dollars, for outreach? Why aren't you using us to support your advocacy? Because we do that work. Like, be strategic in how you put your proposals out, because your resources are limited. I say the same thing with operating. If you know you can get program dollars, why are you coming to me for program? You should come to me for operating.
Absolutely.
Because it's harder to come by.
Yeah.
So.
Everyone should be going to you guys for general operating. Come on. I mean, that's really what they should be doing. Here's Rocio Besa wants to know, how do you react when an organization is not addressing the problem, rather just trying to find a quick solution? Do you just tell them out?
Tell them they're not solving the problem. I mean, a lot of the folks we've declined in the past few years because they're putting a Band-Aid and they just want to do what they want to do. And so, let me see, how can I do this politically correct? If your organization, food is a good example. Food is very popular. People like to give food, right? Churches like to do food drives. Schools like to do. Everyone likes to do food drives. So if I go out into an organization and you say, your thing is food, and I'm asking you about food, and does your food last a family a whole month? And you say no. And then I ask you, so what happens if a family runs out of food? Well, we can't service them. They have to go to another location. And I'm like, well, what is the issue? Why can't people provide food? And you tell me it's jobs. And you're not doing anything related to jobs, or partnering with someone who could come in while people are waiting for food to review resumes, to help with jobs. I shouldn't give you the grant. I should give the jobs person the grant, because they're really the one solving the problem, because you've already identified what the problem is, right? And so we really try to ask those questions and say, well, have you thought about partnering? If jobs is the issue, could you partner with workforce? Could you partner with, X, because they're doing that already, and you have the space, you have the clients, looks like a good opportunity, and they say no, then I say no. Because I want to be putting dollars to solutions and not to just treating immediate needs.
Wow, very good. Sheena Childs wants to know, what advice do you have for someone who's never dealt with grants before? How should they approach the new challenge of deciding that they're going to start getting grants, they're going to start working with foundations?
So to me, those are two things.
Yeah.
I think if you're just getting started with grants, the way that I learned was webinars. I was thrown into writing grants, and I had no training, and so I sought out free webinars, mini webinars. If I could afford a $20 webinar, I paid for that. to help
And
me learn.
There are a lot of cheap grant writing things.
There
out
are a lot.
Yeah.
I was not going to pay $1,000 to go sit for an 8-day workshop. I wanted quick, easy, digestible nuggets. And that's how I started learning how to tell our story and, you know, what did people really want to hear. And then from a foundation thing, it's all about relationships. So getting your face out there, you know, being friendly, but not too aggressive. But if you're seeing program staff out at meetings, introducing yourself, saying hello. There are some of us who do info sessions. Sign up for the info session, come, learn, ask questions, and network with other people who write grants. I know that it feels like it's a competition, and I know that as foundation staff, we create some of that tension, right? Because everyone is not getting a grant, but I think that support each other because it is hard to do this work and it's easy to burn out. And so if you don't have a team at your shop, try to build yourself a support team. It really does work.
You mentioned it's a competition, and early on you talked about you'd like to see organizations collaborate. How important, because you hear that from a lot of foundations, right? We want to see people collaborate. How important is that? Is that like icing on a cake when you see organizations that are big collaborators?
It is, and I think it's also a point of entree. So there's a small organization I had a meeting with recently, really like them a lot, but they're not foundation ready. They're not quite clear on their budget. You know, just some things are just not quite ready. And so, you know, I was asking them, who are you partnering with? And I was like, well, have you considered y'all doing a proposal together? This is a group we're more familiar with. They have a little bit more resources in terms of grant writing. This could be a good first step for y'all, and you can figure out together how to break the grant out so it would support the work that you're doing and support the work that they're doing. And so we would really look favorably on something like that. And it is a great point of entree.
Yeah, that's happened many times. We've had people from Simmons send little groups to us, to Children at Risk, and say, hey, could you work with them? And it's a good way, because then the money is well managed, right? You don't have to worry about those types of things.
Absolutely.
Mary Elaine Ramsey wants to know, you've worked with both sides of the funding experience. So what were some of the challenges in making that transition, going from Children's Defense Fund to Simmons Foundation?
I think my first year, my site visits were like 3 hours long. Because
you really liked visiting.
I liked visiting, and I wanted to help every nonprofit because I remember what that experience was like. So it was really hard to kind of step back and not relate as the program person, but really be able to review with a critical eye because I had done program work. That was probably my hardest transition.
Wow. Shara Cavallari wants to know, how do you decide to give to, if two organizations have the same mission? And she said, you know, youth mentorship is one she mentions. But anyone that has the same mission, how do you decide between the two?
Sometimes it is like eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I mean, sometimes it's really hard. Some things, all things are the same. Sometimes it'll come down to one we had more experience with versus the other. But sometimes it could be, we've had a lot of experience with you. We want to try something new because there was no difference. Everything really looked equal on paper. And that does happen quite a bit, you know, and it's hard. I tell my grantees on the site visit, the worst thing I could tell you is I don't really have any feedback. It just wasn't enough money to go around. Like if you get a declination, I would rather be able to tell you something constructive versus sorry. And sometimes it does come down to that. The fourth quarter is our biggest portfolio, and we have the greatest number of declinations because we just don't have enough in the budget to fund everyone. And so sometimes it is that.
When you think about the organizations that Simmons has funded over and over and over every year, you're limited, but there are some guys that you're just given to, some groups you're given to every year. What are the things about those groups that sort of make them, yeah, we'll give to them every year?
Consistency, advocacy, changing their strategy, right? So it may be you're giving to the same organization, but they're not coming to us for the same thing every year, or they're not doing the same thing every year. You know, if doing the same thing every year worked, we wouldn't still have the same problems that we have.
That's right.
And so it's usually a red flag if you're an organization that keeps having the same ask year after year.
So you like seeing those little changes that are happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Lauren Schoonover wants to know, other than the listed requirements, what are the key things that you personally look for in an organization that's requesting funding? And I'll go more over on that. You talked earlier about leadership and governance. Mm-hmm. Talk about within the realms of leadership and governance, what is it that you're specifically looking for in those areas?
You know, we fund a lot of small and mid-sized organizations.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at leadership, are you only volunteer-led? Is anyone getting a salary, right? And we really discourage people from not getting a salary. Like if you're writing grants, you got to get something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not right to you as the person doing the work. And so we look at your leadership structure as, you know, your executive director, who is your leadership team, who is on your board represents different sectors, right? Is everyone in oil and gas, or do you have some folks who have a law background, who have a PR background? Have you really looked at what the needs of your organization are and try to match your board members to those needs, especially in small and mid-sized organizations, because you don't necessarily have a development team at that point. And so you really need to have a working board. And so you have to be very intentional in how you recruit folks to fill those positions to meet the needs of your organization.
Wow. A lot of things go into all of this, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, let me find one more question for us before. So Stephanie Jones, how do you evaluate or qualify operating expenses? What is that for you?
Operating expenses. So operating expenses for us are things like lights, gas, internet, postage, salary, things that are not directly related to program. Okay. Insurance, healthcare benefits for your staff, things like that.
Regina Wilson wants to know, would you recommend getting an outside evaluator?
You would have to be an organization of a substantial size.
Right. It's not worth it for little groups, right?
It's not.
Yeah, and there's plenty of vendors that want to be that outside evaluator, but I'm not sure that that's always a good idea. It's just a waste of money in some ways.
I do agree it's a waste of money. If you're serving 50 kids, no.
Yeah. And then Victoria Evans, how does a new nonprofit prepare to be foundation ready when the budget is minimal?
First of all, knowing how to do a budget. For a small organization, knowing how to categorize cash versus in-kind, because if you're small and you're a startup, a significant portion of your budget at the beginning may be in-kind, but you need to know how to track that. But I think the weakest thing I see in the small nonprofits is they just don't know how to do a budget. So even if you're starting with an Excel spreadsheet, use the template that already has the formulas in there to really kind of keep you on track. Make sure you're tracking your financials so you get a good sense of what your income and your expenses truly are. Other places I see organizations need to work on in terms of being foundation ready is how to tell your story on paper. We read proposals sometimes that give us 3 pages of statistics, and at the end of the proposal, I have no idea what they do. Right? And so you've got to start learning how to tell who you are and what you do in a very concise and clear manner, because you have your space limited, right? You don't have endless amount of space to do that.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to some fun questions now as we finish up. Your favorite restaurant in Houston, Kelli?
My favorite restaurant in Houston right now is Guru Burgers.
Guru Burgers?
Guru Burgers.
Where is that?
There's one in Sugarland Town Center, and there's one at City Center.
And is it really good?
Yes, and I'm a vegetarian, so they have good vegetarian options and good meat options for my husband.
Wow. So what's the best vegetarian restaurant in town? Not that I will ever go in that place.
Probably Ruggles, but they have meat options. But Ruggles is a good. See, I have to do both.
Yeah, because you're bringing the husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to please the husband, right?
Do.
And what is your favorite sort of best kept secret place in Houston that you think not enough people know about?
Not enough people know about my house. That is my favorite place to hide.
But you don't want people
I
going
do not
there.
want people to go there. Unwind. There's a wine bar on Alameda called Unwind. And that's kind of my new little spot.
Wow. There are a lot of little places in Alameda, aren't they? All
There
of them
are.
that are fantastic that people don't know. I guess they're like neighborhood places or
Yes,
something.
they are.
You ever go to Reggae Hut?
I have.
I love that little place
Wonderful
over there.
veggie patties.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I like about that place, they don't serve alcohol, and you say, "Oh, you guys don't have alcohol?" And they always say, "Well, I've got a red stripe in the back if you want." And so anyway, and when they make the Kelli King-Jackson movie, who's going to play you?
Who is? Oh, that's a good question. Who would I have? Angela Bassett.
Oh,
She's armed.
his arms, right? That's what everyone thinks about with Angela Bassett. Yeah, she'd be good. Wow. Hey, Kelli, thank you so much for all the work that you do in this community and for the work that you're doing. You guys do some wonderful things.
Thank you. And thank you, Twitterverse.
Very good. Hey, we will see you guys next time here in the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Till then, keep up the good work. See you next time.